So for today, we're going to need pencils, eraser, and of course your paper. So what we're drawing today is another one of these still life sketches. You can do this in your own time if you have maybe 5 or 6 small objects that you can just take and put them on the table and arrange them however you like. The only difference here is that today there is a piece of cloth, this cloth that is draped over everything. So I'll tell you what that is for in a moment. So yeah, this is what we're drawing today. Have your supplies. Before we do that though, we're gonna get started by warming up our hands. So take another sheet of paper, maybe a sketching paper or any sort of paper, and we're going to kind of break down every single element separately. So it's not like we're going to do this first. We're not gonna draw the whole thing first. So just have a separate sheet ready. Okay, once your sheet is here, let's start with the basic circle or the sphere. So let's look at this lemon. I'll zoom in. How do we want to hold our pencil? Let's hold our pencil like this. Once again, you don't want to be holding it too much like you're writing. Hold it like you're sketching. I'm pretty sure most of you already know. And start anywhere you like. Make light, fast marks like this. Just want to get the general shape of the object. It is good to have a lot of these angles, like these sharp angles, because you can always round it out later. Okay. Let's apply a little bit of shading. So ignore the cloth at the bottom over here. We're only going to do the lemon. So we're going to shade the lemon and pay attention today to the values. What are values? Well, it's how dark and how light something is. So obviously there's shadows down here and the highlights are up here. So for shading, if you squint at this image, like close your eyes slightly, you can see that you don't want to draw every single white dot, but kind of look for that area that is the brightest. And then sketch it out lightly. You can see that. This way, when we're shading, we can tell ourselves not to shade too much here because that's where the highlights are. Okay. And you just want to really loosely shade. Very, very free and relaxed. Move your arm, not, the fingers. Today we're going to try shading in the midtones before the shadows. So usually if you are in Jenny's class, she likes to start with the darkest first. I also sometimes do that, like you shade in the darkest areas. But today, let's start with shading in the midtone. So the one in the middle that is not too dark, not too bright. and then slowly work in the shadows, so the darkest areas. Remember, when you're shading, you can either hatch, which is just like this, using the edge of the pencil, not up here like that. Want the side, or you can, for example, have a shape and follow the edges of the shape. So follow the curve of the line when you're shading. So this is 1, that's 2. Either way works, as long as there's some sort of structure. And going over the basics of light, the very bottom is not always the darkest. If you can look closely here, there's a little bit of light reflecting onto the bottom. So here we're going to keep it a little bit lighter and then make this part darker. Okay. We're not going to spend too much time on this because we want it to be a warm-up. So don't add too much details. Like, I'm trying to stop myself from doing this. Add a little bit of texture over here. Okay, and at one point you might think to yourself, okay, that's enough. And you can move on to another object, but I'll give you guys maybe 1 more minute. Just loosen your arm, your hand. Okay, I'm gonna keep this up. We're gonna zoom out a little bit. Let's work on the cup over there. So I'm gonna flip this over. With our pencils, let's start anywhere you want. So I'm gonna start with the top. And from this photo, we have really no other choice but to draw the cloth, so you can sketch the cloth as well. Because like this, we have no idea what the edge of the pot looks like or edge of the cup looks like. So we're just gonna keep the cloth for now. It's kind of like an ear. Get a little bit smaller. Once you have the general shape down, you can start sketching, but let me just fix some of these parts first. Always keep adding more lines. And when you're drawing, always has to feel like it makes sense. Like earlier I had this very small, this part. So I fixed it because it wouldn't make sense that it would be balanced. So make something, when you're drawing, make it feel like, you know, this makes sense, that it would exist. It would be this wide. since we're not drawing the bull yet here, I'm just gonna do that, because that tells me I don't need to work on that part. Because once again, this is just a little sketch to warm up, and then we'll get into the actual image, the whole image. Okay, shading begins now. Because this cup is mostly dark, we're going to make our midtone very dark. So values, very important. At this point, I might take my, where's my blender? Take some tissue paper, Kleenex is fine. Just blend it out. Because the reason is I want to work on a flat value before adding in the different lines, different direction. Okay, now that we have a midtone to start, let's start shading in all the darkest areas and whatnot. So go ahead, start wherever you want. I'm going to start in the very inside of the cup. So here's the highlight. And then here's where the shadows are. You kind of see it divides this area in half. I'm gonna make this part darker, a lot darker. See if I can do it. As for the handle, the darkest part is on the inner top surface. So this part is the darkest, and there's a little bit of highlight on the outside over here. Just for practice, if you want to add the shadow, let's cast it onto the table. You can also do that. That's it. Hopefully when you're drawing this, you don't feel that you need to make it realistic, but rather just really loosen your hand and focus more on summarizing the object rather than giving it details. Okay, after this, we're gonna do one more warm up and then we will go into the full image. Okay. All right, let's move on. So put this aside. Actually, I'm just gonna flip it upside down so I can use this side. But you can get a new sheet of paper if you want. All of these are really, really quick sketches, usually maybe 10, 15 minutes, just to warm your hand up. So the next shape that we're gonna do is one of the hardest, I think. It's the bowl. So the bowl over here, let me move it so we can see in the center. So the bowl is slightly hard because of this pattern over here. Sometimes when there's patterns on something, it makes it more difficult to draw. But we'll find a way to make this a little bit easier. So take your pencil and we're gonna sketch this one. Start wherever you like. I'm going to start with the top, which is basically a really long oval. The sides, although they're round for now, let's keep them somewhat straight. So work from left to right, especially if something's very symmetrical. So if two sides are equal, it's good to split it up. So you don't want to be working from left all the way to the right. You want to alternate between sides, so it's more balanced. For the bottom, that's where the bolt ends, and then you just want to connect it. Just showing where the cloth is. You can ignore this for now. You can sketch out the cloth just to tell yourself that there's something there. Oh, okay, hold on. Okay, we're back. Now let's start on the pattern. This is optional. If you want to just draw the bowl as it is without the pattern, like if you want to keep it a flat surface like the cup, you can. But we're going to attempt to do this pattern. So let's think. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one's relatively in the center. So I would start with the center one. It's kind of like an oval shape, but also rectangle. So for this part, don't worry too much about if it's the right shape or if they're the same distance from each other. Just want to imply that there's shadows going on and that it caves in. So once you've done the right one, immediately flip over and do the one on the left. Because the light source is coming from up top, the shadows will be on the upper right hand corner and the highlights will be here. So let's shade in the shadows. Yeah, one of the hardest things to do is getting the values correct. I still find it very hard. So if you can distinguish between lightest and darkest, then that's already very good. One thing to help is always just look back and forth. If you're, let's say you're doing a reference, so you can look back at the video and then back at your sketch and see, okay, which part doesn't look right, and just look back and forth, back and forth. Look at this for a little bit and then look at this. See, I think maybe this part needs to be darker on mine, so I'll keep adding a little bit more. Another thing that helps is comparing. the neighboring shades to each other. So looking at this image, I know that this will be the darkest compared to this, but it is lighter than this. So I'm going to make this slightly dark, and then this will be my darkest area. So take your time just comparing the angles, sizes, the tones of these different parts. Of course, don't forget the bottom of the bowl, like I did. And don't forget the inside of the bowl as well. The bowl has a little edge, so make sure you note that. Just remember that. But don't make it too thick. Okay. And whenever you're ready, we're going to go into the final composition. So draw all of this, but does not have to be fully sketched out. So something a little similar to this. It may look sketched out right now, but let me tell you that if you look closely, I do not spend a lot of time carving out the details at all. It'll just be a very, very loose sketch just to get a little bit more comfortable with sketching these shapes. All right, so whenever you're done, let's put this aside and get into our bigger drawing. So let me get some paper. no, what is that? Okay, with a new sheet of paper, pencil, eraser, let's get started. So you really want to pay attention to not only the basic shapes, but the personality. So what I mean by that is this is a circle, but it's got curves and edges to it. So we got to pay attention to those. Don't make it too simple. Okay, and let's get started. I like to start with the tallest parts and then also the lowest parts, so I know where to put everything else. So the tallest is this little cloth tower over here. Don't worry too much about accurate shape. Because when drawing cloth, you want to be relaxed, or else if you're too stiff or too loose, it can either feel like the cloth is wet, or if it's like stone. So try to avoid holding your pencil too hard or too loose. You just want to grip it so it doesn't fall out. Going to lightly sketch in the four different objects, starting with the bowl. You also want to pay attention to how the cloth is interacting with the different objects. Okay, the lemon is a little bit taller than the bowl, so let's put it right about here. Right on the edge, we have a little box. So let's sketch the box. And this edge is not completely flat to the horizon, right? It's a little bit tilted. So kind of like this. And it ends somewhere over here, but it's covered by this cloth. So might as well just draw the cloth in. Just sketch it in. back to the orange at the very back. Sorry, this light is getting in the way. Okay, another shape that I see that I want to draw right now is this curve of the fold. So it's right below, wrapping around, coming back down, like that. It goes around the bowl, comes up, and wraps over the cup, which we will draw right now. So final shape is this cup. It's taller than the bowl. So I'm gonna compare to this. I might run out of space here. Bad part on mine for planning. Might just touch the edge. Okay, and then we're going to draw the cloth that's in the cup. Pay attention to the tension. So what are some of the most interesting parts of this cloth? If you have any difficulty drawing the folds of the cloth, I can briefly explain what is happening over here. So exactly on the floor, on the table, where the cloth is bending and folding, what essentially is happening is you're seeing these curves as the edge of the cloth. And it's going in this direction. So I'm just looking at this example. The cloth at the very top, there will be a line that goes in whatever direction the cloth is coming from. And at the very bottom, on this bottom curve, there is also a line that extends but disappears because this is the front. Okay, same with all of these. There's a line going up, there's a line at the very bottom. That's basically what's happening to all this cloth over here. You can do it with very, very flat curves as well. So you can take any curve, draw any sort of curve, and this can be helpful if you're drawing clothes, and just draw lines connecting to maybe a point over there. Connect the tops and the bottoms. Tops over top, bottom over bottom, top, bottom. So that is what is happening. All right, once most of the shapes have been sketched, so this is only line, you can start shading. I'll start again with the darkest. This way when I sketch, I won't smudge this side. Just really, really loosely. An example, like the old example over here. If you look closely, there's really no detail at all. It's just maybe 3 layers of lines, 3 layers of hatching. Want for an even more simple look, take your tissue and just blend. And then add some texture up top. Of course, when you're shading, you can flip the page however you want to help yourself be more comfortable. So like right now I'm standing so my arm doesn't curve this way. Right, very loose, not too much detail. This is very dark, so I'm going to emphasize it. just like that. Okay, next I'm going to shade in this bowl. Not worrying too much about the pattern, I'll just draw in some random circles. Right now I'm just sketching out the darkest part, so when I shade it over, I don't have to worry too much about adding the shadows because I've already added them. Now I can go in and just shade. Because other than the shapes, other than the pattern, this bowl is relatively flat. Like the edge, the face. Also going to erase this part because looking at this image, that cloth is in front of the bowl. I'm just erasing this part. Once again, the curve of the cloth, and then there's a line that runs up underneath. And when you're shading, always keep in mind the different techniques. So if we, obviously, if you draw really heavy, for example, make a very dark mark, it will appear dark. And if you have very light shading, it will be very light. Sometimes you can play around with the distance. So for example, one line, these lines are pretty far from each other. You can make them closer. Still a little gap in between, or you can make them very far apart. The more space, the lighter it will be. So you don't have to worry if you're pressing too hard, might break the pencil. You can just do a lot of lines. Essentially, shading is just a bunch of lines that are very close together. So that's shading. Let's resume. I'll work on this orange in the back. So if I squint, the brightest highlight is over here. Next, I'm going to shade the lemon. All right, keep your marks loose and just roll. Really focus on not the details, but the values. So darker, lighter. Wish I had some charcoal right now, but I'm not gonna use it, because then I would make this very, very dark, because in comparison, this is the darkest thing in the image. But looking at this paper, it's not the darkest. And that is because I only have 3B at the moment. But if I had charcoal, and if you guys have charcoal, of course, by all means, shade the darkest parts using charcoal. But if you don't have that at the moment, you can just pretend that this cup is not as dark. Okay, now let's very, very quickly shade in the cloth. So when you're shading the cloth, pay attention to the shapes of the shadows. So, for example, this one, it's the curve of the bowl that's being casted. So this little curve over here, I'm just going to draw a line, telling myself this is where I need a shade. For shading, just once again, hatch it in. And if you'll notice, this part's really dark, so you want to emphasize that. Okay, and it stops here because the cloth does a little fold. And if you think about it, the shadow here is kind of like a circular edge or an oval. Shade that in. Over here, the shadow bends around the cloth. So this line is kind of curved. And we filled in this side. I would say make this darker. All right. And you can start to shade maybe under the cloth as well. You can pick wherever you want to shade. Another very, very dark, the darkest values would be in this little corner and possibly behind here, this cloth. So make those very emphasized as well. Very, very dark. This little triangle. The darker it is, the more deeper it feels. And that's very true because this is a very deep hole, crevice. Another dark part is the shadow behind the lemon. But it's not quite as dark as some of the other ones. Just taking my eraser and getting rid of some errors over here. This part's also kind of dark. By this point, most of the cloth is finished except for this top part, which we'll worry about right now. So I would say start with the midtones because these are not really too dark. Honestly, just a shade wherever you want. There's one thing that I forgot to do, and that is this box. You can shade it if you want, but the reason why I actually took many photos of this, and I had to edit it because the box was originally white. The reason why I made it darker is because it balances this dark thing with this another dark thing. So if it were white, it would feel very heavy on the left side. So hence why the box is dark. You can shade it in if you want, but if you don't want to, that's fine as well. Up to you.
Jay,
Yeah,
can you move your drawing a little bit higher up so we can see the bottom of the drawing?
like this.
Yeah.
Do you want this lower or let me see if I
Yeah,
can.
we can see the bottom now. Yeah. Thanks.
That did not make it any better. Here, I'll just put that in the corner since we're almost done anyways. This. Yep, and one last shadow at the very bottom over here. And we are done for today. How's everyone doing?
I'm trying to take a picture of both your drawing and the original reference picture. So let's see if we can fit the. I know it's tight.
It's a very small desk.
It is. Yes. Okay.
Here, I'll zoom out.
Ah, okay. Yeah, zooming out helps.
Hey. Okay.
Uh, okay.